Welcome back, baseball family. We have a very special guest here with us today. Lee Lowenfish is the author of a brand new book that we're going to get talking about. He's written a lot about baseball. But before we get into any of that, we got to put him in the middle of a rundown. So, Lee, here come your questions. First one is, what is your quest?
My quest uh, uh, to tell the stories of baseball with passion and humor and intelligence.
Well said.
And well done as well, because you're doing it. Next question. What is your favorite color?
Well, orange. This is Ken Singleton's from when he was an Oriole, and one of my
Nice.
favorite players.
Some
Blue is in there
terrific.
too.
Nice.
That's
nice.
awesome. If who's your favorite baseball team?
Baltimore Orioles.
And if the Baltimore Orioles were a beverage, what would they be?
Wow. Uh, a cold hoppy IPA.
Nice.
I think that's what we got, because we only other had one other Orioles fan. I think he said something similar to that, right,
I
Brig?
think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Last question for you. If baseball was an ice cream flavor, what would it be?
Mocha chip.
Ooh, mocha chip.
That's a new one. I like that.
I like that. Yeah.
That's good.
Well, terrific. So, baseball's endangered species inside the craft of scouting by those who lived it is Lee's newest book out. Again, like we said earlier, this is not the first time you've written about baseball, but I have a question for you. Is this the most enjoyable baseball writing you've done?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, now that it's done, I am because my eight magic words I tell writers, especially young people thinking about it, is keep your forward motion and put in the time. And those are really have eight heavy words because I never played. I wish I played more, and I wish I had my father's talent. My father could, the age of 60, my father could fungo of a softball 300 feet in Central Park. But
Nice.
he was 44 when I was born, and he wasn't a coach either. And I'm and so in my very limited softball career, I hit one home run, but it really was a rolling single.
That's amazing.
Yes.
You know, and you know the fathers and sons things about baseball. It really, it's so heavy. But that's why baseball is so heavy and so wonderful. You know, and that's why I
Yeah.
come to love to write about the scouts because they're the ones that have to tell the organizations, you know, this guy can play or he can't play and try it sometime and actually try it in any field. You know, I mean, how do you know when somebody at 19 or 20 what he's going to be? Now you can tell by build and you can tell by tools. And one of the
Mhm.
alternative titles I thought about for this book was turning tools into skills. But I like the way this one came out because especially nowadays with so many scouts getting laid off because of Moneyball, the book and the movie, and because the owners have been are in the thrall of the analytic people who think that we can robotize the player and not work with him patiently. It's been not a good time for scouting, but I hope my book and just intelligent young guys like you build a case that you know this is a game of human relationships. It's not a game of computers and you can use the computer. I mean, I never met Branch Rickey when I did that book, but I met a lot of his family, and I would love to have taught. I mean, he would have, if he lived a little longer. I mean, he would have loved these sports management programs. I mean, he'd be talking 80 hours a day. I mean, because he loved
Yeah.
to. And I'm really sorry that the Continental League that he tried and that I put in my book, and it's an important thing that failed because it led to expansion, but he hated what happened with expansion because he was old enough to remember the 12-team National League when all you did was expand the second division. And I think
Yeah.
baseball's got that problem now. I mean, John Smoltz said it on the broadcast. I mean, it was an aside, but he said he was in 15 postseasons. Now, when you end spring training, only 20% of the teams can really think of doing anything in the postseason. That's a
Right.
really serious issue. And I hope the teams, if they want to win, and of course, a lot of teams now don't really want to win, but the way to do it is through scouting and player development and the wise free agent now and then. And of course, that's not the trend.
Right.
No, it's
We've
not.
actually seen that's one thing that we talk about a lot is that like that's one way that the Astros have found sustained success is they developed all their players. They brought in a guy here and there. They brought in Garrett Cole. They brought in Justin Verlander. Really, the pitching is where they supplemented, but their core guys, they're all homegrown guys. And as much as I'm an AL West guy, so as much as I don't like them, I have a ton of respect for what they did because that's the way they've done it. Right. I
Right.
think that's the best way to build a team. Absolutely.
And I love the comment that Ken Griffey Sr. told his son when he was thinking of free agency about, son, the team that signs you knows you the best. And I call that good paternalism. I mean, there was bad paternalism in the worst aspects of the reserve system, but where I came to really like Branch Rickey is that his famous interview with Jackie Robinson was the interview he gave to anyone he ever wanted to employ. I mean, and he interviewed Mario Cuomo when he was a farmhand with the Pirates, and he basically he told him after talking to him, he said, "I don't think you really want to play this game," and of course he was right. Meeting players, meeting the family. And of course, it's harder nowadays because there's so many divorces, and a lot of people are raised, not by the immediate family. But you have to know what is inside of somebody. And as one of the scouts told me, in the old days, the players wanted to play so badly, they would say their two questions were, "Where do I go and when do I start?"
That's
Nowadays,
great.
it's what round and how much. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
tell you, too many teams are not doing that kind of solid research about the people who are coming into their systems.
Because it is
Yeah.
about more than just the tools, right? It's about the character of the person they're evaluating. It's about their work ethic, and it's way more than just speed and throwing and hitting and all that other more tangible stuff.
That the scout Julian Mock, who was the Red scouting director near the end of his life, and I talked to him on the phone. I never met him, but he had four questions he asked and that's kind of appropriate here. It's Passover week coming up. Four questions he asked a scout before he hired a scout, and I think they apply to players too. The first one is, do you really love this game? Or because that means you love the ups, the downs as well as the ups. Are you willing to work harder than you ever worked before? Because look how long the season is and the preparation. You're not going to be able to go to the beach or go drinking with the buddies. It's a tremendous commitment. Are you able to learn? And he happened to be a high school guidance counselor in Georgia, and that means
Wow.
can you change if you're showing you that you don't know how to approach the curveball, you don't know how to set your feet? And then the last one is really a very important one too. You're willing to laugh every day,
Mm.
because the game, as one of the college players I've gotten to know used to say, the game is designed to beat you up. Because
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's not just because the cliche of 162 games, only a few win 100, and it's the other 60 but it's every pitch, and it takes this very special mentality to accept that and embrace it. And I love the quote of Joe Torre. who was signed by Honey Russell, who was a great basketball coach as well as a baseball scout. And Joe Torre, when he came back to manage the Yankees, and the press was clueless Joe, didn't do
Yeah.
well in St. Louis, Atlanta. He's broadcasting for the Angels, but what he said, I missed the winning and I missed the losing.
Mm.
And that because that that's where this game is so special. And I know if Ricky were alive, he would love a lot of the new analytics, but he wouldn't
Yeah.
be slave to it. And
Right.
that's where I draw the line. They're just and when I watch a game and you see, and this is in the playoffs, I'm sure regular season too, when I see players looking at their iPads and not the game,
Yeah.
because the game, you expose yourself in the game. I mean, there's no helmet, and you're not, you can't make a if you make a turnover in basketball, you can block the guy's shot on the next time.
Hmm.
But I mean, that was Dick Groat's great line to me when I interviewed him for the Ricky book. He said that baseball does things to your coconut. You can't, you cannot, you have to wait until your turn of bat to do something better. So that's where the mental aspect is so important. And while I'm not a Yankee fan, I think Volpe is going to be interesting to watch, because and what I'm really happy about in the book, the last chapter tells the story of the scout that was so important in the signing of Anthony Volpe, Kelly Rodman, who played softball in Connecticut, then hardball in Europe and Asia, and then came back and wanted to stay in baseball. And she became a scout, and really a rising scout with the Yankees. I have pictures in the book of her and Nick Swisher at the draft in Secaucus, and also when she was the Scout of the Year. And unfortunately, she died of brain cancer 3 years ago at the age of 44. But her spirit lives on, and the Red Sox scout Ray Fagnett and the Yankee scout Matt Hyde, they now call the summer game for prospects that they run the Kelly Rodman Memorial, and it's usually played up at Fenway. And that was another possible title for the book, Competitors and Colleagues, because it's true that they're very competitive, but especially before the draft, when they would hide players if they could. But
Yeah.
they want to see good people come into the game, and because it's so hard and there's so many pitfalls. But the good ones and the great ones will survive, and it's always a pleasure to talk about it with guys like you.
Thank you. We talk a lot about women in baseball, and I'm glad you brought up Kelly, because we're seeing a tremendous uh I don't know, I feel like the sport is turning over a new leaf as far as inclusion and allowance for women in the sport. And we're both fathers of girls, and we think that it's just a wonderful thing uh that's happening. And I'm glad you highlighted it in your book as for the scouting aspect of it as well.
Oh, yes. I mean, I think Commissioner Manfred takes a lot of heat, and some of it is deserved, like the wiping out of 42 minor league teams. And I'm afraid some people want even more, and I hope that doesn't happen. But he definitely has a commitment to diversity in the game, and to honoring the African Americans who played um, without any recognition. So he definitely deserves uh, tips of the cap for that. And I just hope that this season, with a lot of the rule changes that I don't think were really necessary, I hope it doesn't become too chaotic, because the focus should be on the great players and winning teams. And if you and you and I, for one, I mean, I think Otani, without a doubt, I mean, he's from another planet. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, but Mike Trout, I'm concerned about. He's been hurt for 3 years. They built up that last at bat in the WBC. Uh, I wish him well, because he's a great player who came out of this area, near Vineland, New Jersey, uh, um, Millville, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Millville.
So I wish him well, but too many injuries, and I have to admit, and as I get older, I have a little George Steinbrenner and Dick Young in me, if you remember. They always got upset at the uh, extracurricular activities instead of baseball. And so when Trout was made visible as the commissioner of the football fantasy league, in which Tommy Phan slugged Jock Peterson,
Yeah.
I thought to myself, well, why weren't you staying in better shape?
Yeah.
So, but I'm not gonna. I mean, I'm not gonna knock Trout. And I mentioned Greg Moorhead, the scout who signed him in my book, and also his father. I mean, you see, the saga of baseball is so special, and we have to keep it going. I mean, Greg Moorhart's father was Mo Moorhart, who's become a great educator and coach in Connecticut. He was with the Cubs, and it was considered a prospect, but when they moved Ernie Banks to first base, that was that.
Yeah.
Uh, anyway, it's the scout stories are so special, and I'm glad I could share many of them in the new book.
I'm curious, like looking through this book, it's very comprehensive as far as like documenting your research and things like that. Like I feel like there's almost as much content in the index and the glossary and things like that and the bibliography as there is in the book itself. So how long did it take you to get everything together and write this book? How much, like, feels like it would take several years to get this done.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, the Ricky book took 10 years. This one, I had the idea really since the 1980s, because I met some scouts at a high school game, and it turned out one of the scouts' grandmother was a patient of my father's. My father was a dermatologist. He was not only a very good ball player in his day, but among his patients were Babe Pinelli, who I got to know, the umpire who called Don Larson's perfect game behind home plate. That was his last game
Whoa.
behind home plate. Major league player who survived the San Francisco earthquake, although his father died. Bill Stewart was another patient of my father, a National League umpire and a hockey coach. And the Stewarts, every Stewart you see in the NHL, almost every comes out of that Bill Stewart tree. And my father actually won a suit that Bill Stewart brought because Leo DeRocher had spiked him and it got infected. So, that was part of my life growing up. And then I meet Billy Blitzer, whose grandmother was a patient of my father. And I said, "Are you related to Ida Blitzer?" "Yeah, my grandmother." "Are you related to Dr. Lowenfish?" "My father." We've been friends since. And he introduced me to Herb Stein, who signed Carew before the draft, and Frank Viola and Gene Larkin afterwards. And so I had that idea. And then when I did the Ricky book and finished it in 2005, I said, well, there's still a lot more to be said about the Scouts. So I got really serious with it at the end of last decade. And in terms of actual writing, it got very intensive the last year or so, and pretty much right at the desk where I'm talking to you. So it's a great experience once it's done to be able, to be at this desk and share these stories orally.
Yeah, that's really neat. Brad and I are both writers as well, so we understand the process and what it takes, and we have journalism backgrounds, and so it's what you've done. I feel like are uniquely positioned to appreciate the work, and Brad said it's comprehensive. So, but my question to you is, aside from people like us, who is this intended for? Who's your general target audience?
Well, that's a good question, and I mean, I'd like it to be a general audience, people who love history, and I knew that I wasn't going to do another 600-page book like the Branch Rickey book.
Yeah.
And people call that definitive. I never used the word definitive about Branch Rickey, who was so wonderfully complicated, but basically a very pioneering good man. With scouting, I mean, I think a book like this can be done in every region of the country because in the heyday of baseball, they came from everywhere, Maine, Washington, and I'm not a Yankee fan, but I give props to the scout Eddie Taylor, who had a brief career for the Boston Braves, but he found Stottlemyre, and Stottlemyre, saved the '64 Yankees and turned out to be a great coach as well. And so they come from all over. So I hope it gets a wide readership. And since the people coming into baseball, all sports now, are becoming readers too, the more the merrier.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, Lee, I think we are just about out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Last question for you before we go. Who's your World Series pick this year?
Oh boy. It's much too early. I mean,
Never
I
too
don't want
early.
to dodge it. I don't. The Yankees will have a solid chance. I don't want it to be the Yankees and the Dodgers because they have so much. They can make mistakes that other teams can't. So as a surprise team, the Mariners. That team has caught on, and
Yes.
DePoto loves to bring in new players. If they stick together, they have a chance, and that would be good for baseball. I'd like to see the Orioles get to the 90 game plateau, but the owner's sons they're not in court anymore, but
The
they're
mess.
still. It's not exactly well run, but
No.
but since you asked me, I'm going to say Seattle and the Braves. And
I've been saying Seattle since 2019, that 2023 is the year.
Yep.
well,
I've
a
been saying
key
it
to
for 4
me,
years.
a key to me is how healthy uh Rodriguez
Julio
remains.
Rodriguez. Yeah, Julio
Because
Rodriguez and
on
Luis
the
Castillo and
DL
Robbie Ray. Those guys have
and
to perform.
and Castillo. I mean, how the Reds. You see, this is what annoys me about today's baseball. That last year, for the first time in the history of the game, four teams won more than 100 games, and four teams lost more than 100 games. That never happened in the history of the game, and I don't see those four teams having improved. And how the Reds let Castillo get away, who, I mean, he's one of the guys I love to watch pitch because he's got two'd, but he's not a jerk.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah, I love Luis Castillo so much. I was stoked out of my mind when the Mariners made that deal.
Yeah.
But anyway, but Lee, thank you so much for joining us again. This is his book right here, Baseball's Endangered Species: Inside the Craft of Scouting by Those Who Lived It. When is your book out, Lee?
Well, April Fool's Day is out tomorrow, actually, and
No
That's
joke.
awesome.
copies are available, from the University of Nebraska Press, which is the publisher of more baseball books, I think, now than any house in the country, and they've done a nice job. That's Tom Greenway on the cover. I'm
Yeah.
doing an interview, by the way, in Brownsville, Texas next week. It was canceled, it was postponed, and the guy that interviewed me says, "Man, Sandy Koufax on the cover," and no, that's Tom Greenway, who actually has a little bit of Harry Dean Stanton in him too. So again, we're all connected, baseball culture and the things we love about the most,
That's
So
why we do baseball together here. That's
yeah,
that's
yeah,
our whole thing.
yeah. All
For
right.
Well,
sure.
thanks, Lee.
A
Thanks,
pleasure
Lee. We
talking to
appreciate
you.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Thanks.